What's in it for the European service companies is that they get access now to this hugely lucrative market. We estimate between $1 and $100 billion. What Canada wants is to break down the rules in Europe against our genetically engineered exports, our food exports, and our beef exports, and our dirty oil. So this is the very bad negotiation that's being done now, and if you haven't read about it, it's because our newspapers are doing a shocking job of not telling you. Our mainstream media just does not want to talk about this. The government doesn't boast. This is a long time and a long way away from Brian Mulroney, who said, you know, give me 20 years and I'll change this country. You'll never recognize it. And he was so proud and he punched through these free trade agreements. Now it's all hush-hush, don't be silly, you people don't need to know anything. We'll take care of it. But it's a very dangerous, this CETA is a very dangerous threat to Canada's water, because the two biggest water corporations in the world, the utility corporations, are Veolia and Suez. They're in France. They're totally behind this agreement. They eventually want to unlock the American market. That's their big goal. But they want to do it by starting in Canada. And if any municipality anywhere even thinks about privatizing wastewater or water services, they'll be able to come in and set the conditions under which that will happen. No local control. You can't say it has to be a local company, and they'll be able to come in and underbid. I'm also very, very concerned about amendments to the Fisheries Act that are really gutting the concept. The Fisheries Act is in itself not a bad act. It basically says that you cannot put anything deleterious to aquatic life into fish-bearing lakes and rivers in our country. Now, they ignore it all the time. At any one time, half the mining operations in this country are in violation of this act, but at least it exists for us to use. But they've now got something called Schedule 2, which is an amendment to the metal mining and affluent regulation of the Fisheries Act, which basically allows a mining company to apply to rename a lake, a healthy fish-bearing lake, to say it's no longer a lake, but rather it's a tailing impoundment area, and to dump their toxics in it. And we are working in at least 12 communities, and we think there may be as many as 20 of these now on the books across the country where mining companies are moving in to kill perfectly healthy lakes. 2 days ago, I was up at Fish Lake, which is a beautiful lake near Williams Lake. Fish Lake has 65,000 wild trout and is the ancestral and cultural home to the Chilcotin people, but also to many other First Nations peoples in the community. And it is slated to be a Schedule 2 lake. They want to absolutely drain it, pour their toxins into the rock base at the bottom, and they're going to build, they say, an artificial lake, and they'll move some of the trout, and hopefully they'll maybe at some point breed over in this other lake, which they admit that for at least 100 years they'll have to feed water and nutrients into to even see if it can live. So we are working very hard and are going to be challenging through a court case the legality of having an amendment actually counteract the very meaning of the original act itself. There's another amendment coming to the Fisheries Act called the Wastewater Systems Effluent Regulation, and it is going to decriminalize most of the effluent now, the actual discharge currently under Section 36 of the Fisheries Act, which is the most important provision of the Act. So it's just like relentless. And then, if that's not enough, then the federal government has announced in the budget and in the throne speech before that they're going to be deregulating mineral mining and oil exploration, and basically handing over the regulatory functions to the companies themselves. Somebody the other day called it the privatization of regulation. I call it deregulation, but I thought that was an interesting way to put it. I have to say to you, and we're nonpartisan in my organization, that in all the years that I have worked against one government after another, provincially and federally, the federal Harper government is simply the worst in terms of human rights, social justice, most particularly environmental stewardship that we have ever had. And they're very dangerous, and what they're doing is dismantling years and years of work that other people have put together. They're doing in Canada what George Bush and Dick Cheney did in the United States, but it's just under the radar screen because our media is not telling the story, with exceptions, but generally, by and large, they are not. Then, of course, you get the situation here. I mean, I won't go into the specifics in British Columbia because there are people who know this far better than I, but I just want to warn about several things. One is creeping privatization through wastewater systems, and one of them is right here on the island itself. There are proposed 3 Ps on Vancouver Island with a pulp and paper company called Catalyst that's looking to get away from, in agreement to have their taxes capped. And they're looking at, first of all, Powell River, but they're also looking at North Cowichan, Port Alberni, and Campbell Rivers. So we immediately have this privatization fight right here in our own communities here. The run-of-river, of course, which you're all involved in, but just to remind us that this is also the privatization of a public water source for the private use and profit of corporations. And I want to remind us that we're in BC living next to the first jurisdiction in Canada, in Alberta, that's actually introduced water markets. Water markets, there are many forms of privatization. There's utility privatization, there's bottled water, and so on. But markets are where you actually name the water to be a property, and you allow the selling, buying, hoarding, and trading of water licenses. They did that in Australia. In 1994, the then Conservative government just handed over the water licenses. They said we're converting to rights. And all these great big huge industrial conglomerates, big cotton conglomerates and so on, now own these rights. And the idea, they said, was, well, you'll trade these to a more efficient use of water. Well, they didn't. They hoarded them. They, bought and sold and gathered them so that they'd have more. And there are now way more water rights in Australia than water that exists. So when the current government came into power a couple of years ago, they were desperate because the Murray-Darling River is dying from the bottom up, from the mouth up. So they now need to buy back these water rights they should never have given in the first place. These companies never even paid for them. Now the companies are saying, well, we're going to charge you billions of dollars for these water rights. And the governments can't afford it. Now private foreign investors are coming in and buying up these water rights. So Chile actually has public auctions where they sell water rights and the actual water, and Canadian mining companies come in and they outbid local people, local indigenous people and so on, local farmers and so on, small communities for their water, and the water is actually pumped away from these communities for these mining operations. This is where privatization will take you. The most extreme form, perhaps, of privatization now are large investment pools, but also countries, interestingly China and India being the biggest right now, buying up tracts of land and water in Africa and other places where they're desperate for any money, so that they will own this water at a future time when they need it. So we are seeing the advancement of this privatization notion in many, many, many ways. And then just, I guess, to say the last strong thing I want to say about the federal government is that it refuses to recognize, continues to refuse to recognize the right to water at the United Nations, which just shames me unbelievably. I had the honor last year of being the senior advisor on water to the 63rd president of the United Nations General Assembly, Miguel Descotto Brockman, who is just a wonderful human being and a joy and honor to work with. The first thing anybody would say to me, any ambassador or anybody I meet with, well, clean up your own act. I mean, why would your government be taking this position? And I don't know officially why. They give 100 different reasons, but I was told by a very senior official at the UN that they were in a meeting where someone from the Canadian embassy said, or the Canadian mission said, it's because we don't want to give a tool to First Nations communities in our country because of the situation of water. It's also because in NAFTA, water's a tradable good, and it would be hard to square being a tradable good with a human right at the UN. So we have a lot of work to do in this community, in this province, and in this country. The good news, so there's your bad news. There's lots of good news. I'm going to talk about good news now. The good news is that there is a growing consciousness